Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at etrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Roadmaster Diode wiring on a 2023 Ford Ranger. Now, diode wiring is a pretty nice way to transmit your light sequence from your RV to the taillights on the towed vehicle. And a lot of times you've probably seen those magnetic lights that stick onto vehicles, but that's one more thing that you have to hook up and actually store. And also a lot of your braking systems are going to require that diode wiring to be able to tie into it for some of those light signals. Now, this is going to be available in a few different configurations. You can get one that has no ends on it and no umbilical, but you can also get a 4-pole end. And as far as the umbilical, you can get one with a coiled, a hybrid, or straight cable. So whatever's best for your application, that's what you're going to want to choose. And some of your tow bars will come with that umbilical, so having the option to not have to get that is pretty cool. So the main thing the diodes are going to do, as you can see, is mimic the light sequence on the RV. So that way when you have your brake lights, running lights, and turn signals on, it's going to transmit it here, keeping you safe and legal. And all of those light sequences are going to transmit from the 7-pole that you have on your RV to the 6-pole that you'll mount on the front of your towed vehicle. And that's pretty much the basics of it, as you have a hookup here and this transmit to your light sequence. So pretty straightforward as far as taking your cables, connecting it to your 6-pole, and having that route to the taillights where you're going to tie into your factory stop and turn and running light sequence. But also you do want to pay attention to what braking system you have, because you may need to pull an extra loop up into the engine bay to be able to tie into that. When it comes to flat tuning a vehicle, there's going to be 5 main required components to be able to accomplish that. And the first one, we'll start on the vehicle side, is going to be your base plate. And your base plate attaches to the frame of the vehicle to create a structural mounting point for your tow bar, but also a lot of times your safety chain loops, and sometimes you'll also have spots for the rest of your components. Now, the tow bar will be that connecting point between the base plate and the hitch on the RV, and that's really what's structurally holding it all together. You also have a braking system that's going to allow the vehicle to slow and stop as necessary. And here we have a breakaway cable, so in case of an accidental disconnect, it's going to pull that cable and apply the brakes on the vehicle, and that way it's not rolling down the highway. Going along with a little bit of safety, we have our safety chains, which attach to the base plate and then the hitch on the RV, and that's going to be in case of a catastrophic disconnect. You still have that attachment point. It's going to hold onto the vehicle again, so it's not free rolling down the road. We also have our diode wiring, which is going to transmit the light sequence from the RV to the taillights on the vehicle. Also, your diode wiring is used in a lot of different braking systems as well, but that way you can have your running lights, your turn signals, and brake lights happen on the back of the vehicle to let people know what you're doing. And as far as installation goes, it is pretty straightforward. Again, main thing is you are going to be routing it to the back of the vehicle, so you're going to be under the vehicle to get a nice safe path going there, and then you're going to tie into those factory taillight wires, which can be scary because you are cutting your lights, but it does have the diode in place. So if there's any backfeed that might occur, it's going to be protected, and when you're not hooked up, it doesn't affect your factory wiring. Everything's going to work as normal. And the great part is once it's installed, you can simply just plug in your umbilical and you're ready to go. Speaking of that installation, let's take a look at that now. Now, when installing diode wiring, it's really not too hard to do. The main thing is just routing it from the front of the vehicle to the back of the vehicle. Now, something you want to take in consideration, some of the braking systems will tie into the diode wiring, so setting yourself up for success to have that extra wire to tie into is really going to make a big difference. So on this one in particular, on our Ranger, we're doing the Stay and Play Duo, which is a great braking system. It does tie into it, so I'll show you where I pulled up a little bit of extra loom. Now, what we have here is our bracket mounted up where our 6-pole is going to go, and I recommend pulling out just an extra length, and that way you can tie these all into the plug and then snap it in, rather than really having to fight to get those wires tied into that plug. So give yourself just a little bit of extra room here. And for this one, I've routed it up on the driver's side as the exhaust is on the passenger. So throughout this whole process, as you're routing wires, make sure you're checking for any suspension, any steering, any hot, basically anything that can damage wire. Try your best to stay away from that, and following a lot of the factory wire loom will help do that. Now, I started here and just kind of routed it up. I used a pull wire technique. I have an airline tube, and I just fished that down, tied our wires, and then started pulling it up. Now from here, I've kind of made my way right here in front of the battery, and this is where I zip tied up a loop, and this is where the rest of my braking system will tie into. So having this loop, again, is just going to make it a little bit easier to get this all set up. Now from here, I kind of pass it down. We do have our steering arm, and you also have, you know, the motor that you're going to want to stay away from. So I'll raise the vehicle up and give you a little bit better shot of how I ran it. Now I passed this down through the engine bay using, again, the fish wire technique just to make it a little bit easy. And again, tying it, kind of using the factory wire loom or things to kind of keep it tight against the firewall is really going to help keep it away from not only the steering shaft, as I mentioned before, but also this has a nice little spout for when you change your oil filter. You want to make sure you're not going to be in the way of that, because when you do your next oil change, you're not going to be very happy. So keeping it nice and tight is key. From here, I just kind of routed this along the frame rail, and you can kind of use these clips. I really recommend not zip tying it to any hard lines. You don't want any chafing, so I kind of just used this. Now at this point, you're going to see my white wire comes off, and I've attached my ground, my ring terminal, as well as a self tapper, and that's going to be our ground. Now the reason I did it at this point is because when you peel back that white wire, that's going to give us an extra jumper wire to allow us to go from taillight to taillight. So it's kind of twofold. You get your ground and you have that extra little bit of length of wire. So you can peel that white wire back, cut your wire and strip that back, put your ring terminal, and then just self tap this into the chassis. Now continuing on, this just kind of goes up over the fuel tank, and there is some wire loom that I attached it to there. Now from here, I did split my wires again. My green is going to go to the right turn signal, so our passenger side, and then our yellow and brown is going to run up to the left turn signal, or the driver's side, and this is also going to tie into our tail markers. So that's where that white wire comes into play, as we're going to be jumping that together, and then that's going to run across to the other side. So I actually took my extra loom, or my extra wire that I cut from that ground wire, and so here I have my white wire running across, and this is pretty easy. Above the hitch, there is some kind of corrugation right below where the tailgate sits. I just kind of ran that across, and now I have an even length that can reach both of my taillights. We do need to take our taillights out, and that way we can tie into the factory wiring. So we have two 8mm screws that are holding this in. We'll go ahead and take these out. And with your taillight, just kind of wiggle this back and forth. It should pop out pretty easy. You do have some tabs here. If they do fight you, those are going to be located along here. You can use a plastic trim tool to kind of pry that, but ours came out fairly easily. Now at this point, we are going to want to unplug our wiring. Now there's a little locking clip here. So there's a red tab. Just pull that straight back and then push on the center part here, and that should allow us to get this separated. So this one was a little bit tricky. It's just this tab. I used a flathead to kind of push on this to really get that leverage. Now there is a little clip here that's got a zip tie, and just to make this a little bit easier to set our taillight aside, I'm just going to go ahead and clip this, and we can go back and re-zip tie it up later. But we'll have our diodes in line, so it'll be nice to utilize this later on. Now at this point, set your taillight aside. And they have factory wire loom on here with some electrical tape. Let's go ahead, we'll peel this back. That way it's going to expose the wires that we're going to be able to tie into. You can take the wire loom off pretty easily, but it does have this, almost looks like electrical tape wrapped around it. And I'm going to get this kind of peeled back. If you can get a part of that and unravel it, awesome. That's going to be your best bet. Mine's not working too well with me, so I'm just going to kind of use my little snips here. Now obviously make sure you're not damaging wire, so just make sure that you're only catching that tape. And so I'll kind of get this cut back a little bit, and I found that once you kind of make a slit, you can pull this back, and we're going to want to expose, I would say, let's give it a foot. We do have plenty to work here, but it's going to make mounting up our diodes a little bit easier to get this peeled back. Now with this peeled back, I'm going to find my solid red wire, and then there should be a black with a white stripe. These are going to be the wires we're going to tie into. So go ahead and snip those. And then we're going to come back and strip both ends of the wires. And these are pretty thin, and so we'll be putting them in spade connectors. So what I actually do is I'll strip it back just a little extra, you know, half an inch or so. And that way when I attach them into the spade connectors, you can throw some bends on here, and that's just gonna give it a little bit more to bite onto. So that's kind of up to you. But with all of our ends stripped back, you're gonna wanna go ahead, grab your diodes, and we're gonna grab the spade connectors off of them. With our spade connectors taken off our diodes, we're gonna go ahead and we can put blue ones. Make sure they are blue, as there is one yellow, but we'll be using that later. And go ahead, crimp these down. And with all of them, I highly recommend just give it a quick tug to make sure that it's bit on, it should be able to hold up pretty well. If that comes off easily, you are gonna want to re-crimp that. You don't wanna have to go back and trace any loose connections. We're gonna take our diode, and out is gonna face towards our plug. So you can go ahead and put those into place. And then, just with that same corresponding color, you can put this on to either of the inside, it doesn't matter. Just make sure you have those same wires on the same diode. So obviously we still have these ones to attach, and that's where it comes in to pull up our brown and yellow, as well as that white jumper wire up through here. You can see there's a nice opening where that factory wire loom goes through. So you should be able to pass that up. I'm gonna just use my pull wire as I've done on the other spots on the vehicle, just to make it a little bit easier for us. I'm gonna trim off my excess here. It's okay to have a little bit of extra. It's gonna make it actually a little bit easier once you get your diodes to get it kind of put in a good place here. Now I'm gonna split my brown and yellow. And the white is our jumper wire. So what I'm gonna do is there's gonna be a yellow spade connector here. That's gonna be for our brown and white for our running light signals. So let's strip this back and get that one crimped down. And just kind of twist these together. Our remaining wire, our yellow here, we'll strip this back and get a blue spade on there. And then we can make our connections on our diodes. So our black and white is gonna be our running light and or our tail light markers. This is going to be our brown and white jumper. And then our stop and turn is going to be our solid red, so our yellow can go here. And this brings me up to a point that when choosing your components for your Ranger, this is going to require a brake light relay. And what that means is if you're on the brakes and you have your turn signal on, unfortunately it is going to override it. So that brake light relay will make sure that that doesn't happen. So that is something that you're going to want to add to the components of your Ranger when doing a flat tow. Now at this point we have all of our connections made. So we're going to tidy this up. I'm going to go ahead and kind of get this wire. I can actually probably use the factory wire loom to kind of clean this up. And this has double-sided tape. So a lot of times what I'll do is just kind of stick these together to keep them tidy. And then also I wrap electrical wire or electrical tape around these. That way the wires aren't going to be able to be pulled or have tension on these and come loose long term. So tidy this up how you want. And then from there, you're just going to plug in your taillight and get that put back in place. We'll hop over to the other side, get our taillight out, and then we're going to run up our green wire as well as that white jumper over there. So the passenger side is going to be identical as far as the color wires that you're going to tie in. So it's still going to be that solid red and black with white stripe. Now we have our jumper and our green. So our jumper wire here is going to be again for our running lights, which is going to be our black and white. And then our green will go to our stop and turn. At this point, we'll go ahead, get this all cleaned up, and then we'll head to the front where we can attach our 6-pole. We're gonna make our way to the front here. We have our diode wiring. This red wire is gonna be for a charge line. So if you're putting a charge line, this is gonna be when you tie it in. And this is also something that I recommend. It's gonna trickle charge your battery as you're flat towing in that accessory mode, and that way you don't have to charge your battery when you get to your destination. So it's a nice easy upgrade that really doesn't break the bank to throw in, and now is the best time to do it. What we'll do is the boot that's on the back side of that 6-pole, go ahead, we're going to take this and just kind of slide it through here now. And then all of our wires, we're just going to strip back a little bit here. And your 6-pole looks like this on the back side. There's going to be little screws that's where our wires are going to feed into, and when you tighten those down, that should hold the wire in place. So what I'll do is I'm going to back these out. Now don't take them out completely because they're rather small and they're kind of tricky to get back in, but back this out enough to where this is going to open up and allow you to get that wire in place. And there are going to be letters that are molded into this that will determine where your wires go. So I'll get these hooked up and then I'll walk you through it and show you how it looks. With all of them attached in place, something I'll mention, you don't want to crank them down too hard. You can damage those wires. Just make sure it's snug enough to where they're not going to pop out. Starting at the 12 o'clock position, you're going to find that it's molded in TM. That's tail markers. We're going to start with our brown. Moving over, we have GD for ground. That's going to be white. LT, left turn signal, is going to be yellow. RT is right turn signal for, that's going to be our green. And then if you do have that charge line, that's going to go in that tall center post. Now, something that we do to kind of help prevent any moisture from building up, it's on the front of the vehicle, so you got to expect it to maybe get some breakdown over time. We use black RTV silicone, so what I'll do is I'm going to kind of coat some of right where it's attaching in, and that's going to prevent water from really getting in there and breaking down. But also, once I slip the boot over, I'm going to backfill this. Now, that's why it's also beneficial. When I pulled up that extra line for the braking system, it's nice to have a little extra. In case you ever have to replace this, you could just cut this off and have enough wire and not have to put anything else on there. So we'll slip our boot on. I'll backfill this. Kind of squish that around, make sure that you got it kind of moved all through there. And what I'll do is I'm going to put some electrical tape around this, but before that I am going to put some wire loom on our exposed wires. It's just going to keep it a little bit cleaner looking. It's kind of up to you. You don't have to do that, but again, if you're here and you want to make it look nice and tidy, this is a good way to do it. So now we'll go ahead and just get this mounted up. Depending on your base plate, some of them have little prongs that come out that you'll use a self-tapper. We have a bracket here, so I'll go ahead with my hardware and get this tightened down. And then we need to test to make sure that it's working. We have everything installed, but we obviously want to check to make sure that it's going to work. And the best way that we do it here is using a test box, which you probably don't have at home. So this just is going to mimic the RV and the 7-pole there. So what you'll do is hook your umbilical to the 7-pole on your RV and run through the light sequence. Have someone check the lights on the back of the vehicle and make sure that they're corresponding. So we're going to start off with our running lights. Next we'll do our left turn signal, our right turn signal, and then finally our brakes. So with all of our light functions working properly, that's really going to do it for your diode wiring installation. Now if you again do have that braking system that ties into it, you will be splicing into it, but this is going to be protected with those diodes, so you don't have to worry about anything there. Something I will recommend too, if you are doing a charge line, make sure you don't have it hooked up to the battery when doing this installation. You don't want it to give you a little quick zap there, as it could have power going through it. So other than that, hopefully this helps you get your diodes installed. And that was a look at installation of the Roadmaster diode wiring on a 2023 Ford Ranger.